Welcome to the API Resilience Podcast. If you've ever wondered what it really is we do when we do APIs, and if you've wondered how APIs change organizations, our communities, and our society, look no further. This is the podcast you've been searching for. I'm Christoph van Tomme, and together with my co-host Mark Bergauer and our guests, we explore how deliberate complexity, social practice theory, and a deeper understanding of socio-technical systems can transform our organizations and the world we live in.
You said something earlier that maybe sort of spark a question that I would like to explore with you, because you will understand what I mean by it. So you said, I don't know where it comes from, but I have experienced this so it's articulated in all sorts of fields. So you hear it in Agile, you heard it in service design, Lean, but start at the end and work backwards. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But actually, and I'm going back to for your talk, you used the biological metaphors, and Alicia Correiro says we're now entering an age where we should get away from physical metaphors to biological metaphors. But when you say the end, actually what you mean is the whole, yeah? So when we build an API, as a whole, it has to have, we want to start thinking about what does it do in the environment, yeah? How does it sit in the environment? What does it correspond to? Who's benefiting? Before we think about how we build it, right? So when you say the end, that's what you mean.
When I say the end, I mean, what impact is it going to have in the person that's using it? Exactly. Remember I said about that 3-stack, 16-stack Venn diagram, right? Yeah. If you only look at the, I remember what I said, Mark, if you only look at the containing system, which is a systems thinking approach, that just gives you a higher order abstraction. There's an infinite number of possibilities in that higher order abstraction. By starting with what is it going to be used for, then the way I think about this is like you have a dartboard with a bullseye on it. And unless you are hitting the bullseye, you can hit the edge of the board. That's not what we want. You can hit the first ring. That's not what we want. If you can hit the second quadrant, that's what we want, the bullseye. And unless you are in the vicinity of that bullseye, it's a way of course correction. Then you already know, okay, somehow I missed a trick. I deviated too far. I need to come back and course correct. And it's literally like guide ropes. So by making sure that you can always achieve what your outcome is, what happens a lot of times is the pin that you dropped and you said that's where your bullseye is moves, because you have a better understanding and you realize you were pointing at the wrong bullseye. So now you need to adjust the location of your bullseye and then start that whole thing again. But at least you're always oriented in this abstract space, trying to figure out what it is that you're doing. So that's what I mean by I literally do mean the end. What is the purpose of this thing? And work backwards. First start, yes, look at the surrounding or containing system and make sure that at least your Venn diagram is the thing that you're working on is not hanging half out. It's fully contained within that system or within that circle.
In that context, how do you deal with unexpected affordances that the system? So this is one of the things that I'm super excited about with APIs is that, and I've told this to customers, if you are not being surprised by what people are doing with your APIs, you've been doing it wrong, because it means that you are not providing sufficiently abstract affordances that people can do new things with, because that's the whole point. But in that viewpoint, it's like the bullseye. You don't even know yet where the bullseye is, or there's some hidden bullseyes, or there's like a multi-dimensional sets of bullseyes.
You pick one.
You pick your spot. Yeah.
You pick one and you start with that.
Yeah.
And then when you get there, you figure out, okay, actually, I needed to go a little further left. But you always have a focus. That's one. And then something that you said, Christoph, about not necessarily being sure, or you have a space, then to borrow from DDD, draw the bounding box. As long as you are inside that box, then you have a pretty good chance of being able to create the set of APIs that make sense for that context. But if you are outside of it, then chances are pretty low. So it's really about either somehow defining the scope of your focus, and it can't be too large. I prefer the bullseye version, because then nobody can answer that is the point. Is X, Y, Z. Is that where we are? Are you there? No. So let's keep going. And it saves some of the bike shedding conversation. But what if we went left? And no, stop talking. Just do. Let's get there. When we get there, then we'll figure out if we're right.
That's right.
Yeah.
In the preparation, you said something that really made me think, or that I'm curious if you have some really deep meaning behind it, or which was because one of the questions we had in the preparation was, what's the difference between REST APIs and SOAP APIs for you? And you said VHS and Betamax. What's the story there?
Okay, so my preference is SOAP.
Oh, interesting.
Because it's specific. If you have a SOAP API, the SOAP API self-defines and says what attributes it is going to send. There's nothing to guess, unless so if you make a mistake, you get a correction. HTTP REST API, you get a bunch of JSON, and then you still have to inspect and interpret and figure out. Other than if you don't have an error condition like a 500, so the server's blown up, or 403 denied, right? That's a clear server response. Once you get a response, then you've got a whole bunch of introspection to do to figure out, what did I just get? Is it valid? Is it not? Why do I have to do all of that when I ask for something? Either give it to me or don't. But then the thing that bumped that, so I think it's superior. I'm not quite sure, and that's why the analogy with VHS and Betamax came in. Now, the story behind that, for people who are much younger, and I was talking to my niece the other day, we used to have a recording format which was magnetized tape for video. And there were two formats that were battling it out. Now, Betamax was much more superior technically. It was a smaller cassette. It was higher quality. So SOAP. VHS won out because it was more accessible. So people never even heard of Betamax. If you heard of videotapes, I don't even know what VHS, I can't remember what it stands for, but that became the standard format for video format recording rentals, and done. So just because you have superior technology doesn't mean that it's going to be successful and it's the right answer at the time for what it needs to serve.
We had once a conversation with Robin from TUI, and he said that for him, SOAP, because it was so well defined, it coupled the different parts of the system too tightly together. Or, well, this is my interpretation. I'm paraphrasing very much. By having it less well defined, so by having actually a slightly crappier system, or well, maybe not crappier, but like, and I'm paraphrasing, so these are not his words, this is my words, but that it enabled new unexpected uses, or that it separates different parts of the system and creates that boundary again, that semi-permeable boundary, where the same message can mean different things on the two sides. But you're right. It's cleaner if you can define the domain, if you can define all the different attributes and have it.
Well, it comes back again to that conversation. I was thinking about and the space. My personal opinion that APIs really thrive is the commodity space. You don't keep reconfiguring your washing machine. The interface is standard, it's the same. But as a designer, things don't just turn up in a commodity space. They start from Genesis all the way through and have a whole bunch of evolutions and interactions with people in order to navigate what's the path from an idea to this is the configured use. And that's because we're human. That happens because we're human. And if you don't allow for that, then any system that comes pre-packaged, pre-configured, pre-everything, yeah, you will target the people who prefer that, and everybody else will say, don't care. No value to me. I'll go off and do something else. And this comes up again and again and again. And that's why that story about VHS and Betamax literally jumped into my head when I saw that question, because I personally, for the purposes that I use it for, prefer SOAP, but every day I am using HTTP REST APIs.
I think there's even a deeper layer to that comparison.
Yeah.
Because I read the story of the business side of why did VHS win, and as far as I remember, it was because they had a bigger consortium, so they had a bigger network, like a bigger community of people that were
accessibility.
Yes,
right. So that was made more widely available, and it didn't matter how fantastic.
If it was
a very crucial point was that VHS was good enough. So yes. Betamax was technically superior, but the user experience. So I'm probably one of the few people who actually ever saw a Betamax kit at home. My rich friend, he had a Betamax. Next to a VHS. And unless you actually had an expensive television, you couldn't tell the difference. You needed a high-resolution monitor, which at the time was sinfully expensive to actually see the difference. VHS was good enough.
That's an excellent example, Mark, because the API, fantastic, but it needed another thing in order to exercise the full value, and you were still plugging it into some crappy TV. So why would I spend $500 on a system when I could get the same experience for $100?
I think it's also this slightly more lossy, because it's less defined.
Correct. Yes.
It also enables the network better, because it can be different things for different people or for different organizations.
Yeah.
So this, it's a very interesting allegory, VHS and Betamax.
You got me thinking, Christoph, because that, I don't know what it is. It's random noise.
Yes.
There has to be some of that in every experience with people. Yes. I know that as a designer, but I never thought about it until we're talking about it now in terms of these definitions. And yes, the businesses could have forced that, Mark, but it's not just that it was good enough, it was expressive enough.
And because it's lossy, because it's less defined, it also can dance a bit. And I think because that was the with SOAP, you had to understand the full system in its entirety and predict what you're going to do with it in all the different parts of the business. And you couldn't just switch what one part of the business was doing, because you had to change your whole API, because the model had to change if you changed it in one location, which meant that the whole organization had to change, and that made it really, really expensive and difficult. And I've talked with people that are doing these we're going to create the one model for the whole company thing.
You're right.
Yeah.
As soon as everybody says that, I just take my laptop, close it, and I leave. Because
Yes, exactly.
good luck. Good luck to that. You're going to find every no. Clearly define the ones that you will cater for and leave the space. Again, the noise definitely got me thinking about this. Maybe it's not noise, but another factoid, 80% of an atom is empty space. 80% of humans made up of water. This thing keeps coming up again and again. There's this allowance for space and flexibility and for something to be created. I don't know if it even has a name, but if you create an experience that doesn't have that, audiophiles have gone back to records because you can get the crispness and an experience that is unique, is not just a snapshot and repeatable and the same. There is variability.
Yes.
Without that variability, then I can almost guarantee you're on a hiding tail. So every time I hear somebody say, "Oh, I'm going to create this once," good luck with fine. Call me when you're serious about making something that people want to use, because that is not the human experience. I don't have a definition for it, but at least with my experience with being a designer, there is something about that. It's not a void, but space.
Yes.
That allows for other things to happen.
It's the variability that's the point.
Yeah.
And the constraints are enabling variability. It's not prescriptive. It's enabling.
Yes. It's not prescriptive. It's definitive, and then knock yourself out and do whatever you want with the rest.
Yes.
Right. As soon as you try to be prescriptive, then you're probably not going to have. You have some success, but you're basically going all the way from idea to commodity in one jump. That's never going to work. So that's interesting. That literally popped into my head when I saw that question, HTTP or SOAP.
So I was still a bit curious about this argument from your friend, and want to explore that, because my understanding might be wrong about these two frameworks, but I believe you could create every way an HTTP REST interface looks to the outside in a SOAP framework. Yeah, so they're not. So they are technically different, but SOAP is to the extent more flexible that you could mimic probably even a REST if you wanted to.
Yeah, but I think that Christoph has a good way of describing it. SOAP was prescriptive, whereas
but you already said the more prescriptiveness is something, so you could get the precise information that you wanted.
Exactly,
so that prescriptively had value, but you could just ignore it at the consumer end, I would guess.
No, it's a contract.
Not that easy.
It's a contract. It was prescriptive and it was a contract. Whereas
I'm weakening the point I want to make a little bit. If we look at why did VHS 1 over Betamax was not a technical, it was a social.
Yeah.
This was
social. Yes,
it was an outcome of social things. Yeah,
I call it the not technical. It could have been social. It could have been economic. It could have been a bunch of things. But basically,
we agree that if it would have been on technical merit, Betamax
then they would have won. Yes.
So it were social factors that made VHS more competitive, more viable, or whatever. Yeah, it just had to be good enough. So equally, when we have technical standards that are competing. That's my experience. Now, okay, I haven't been doing tech for a long time, but I did it for a long time before that. And it was always my experience. What would win had nothing to do with the technical merits. Yeah. What would win would always be determined by social components, social aspects.
Because it's no longer the limiting factor, Mark.
Yeah.
Something else, like Christoph was saying, some other constraint now is the limiting factor. And where we live now today, we basically have Cray computers in our hands. So the tech is not the limiting factor.
So what are the limiting factors for making APIs successful if it's not technical?
It's the application of those APIs. It's the social, it's the economic, it's the environmental. Okay, let's take, I'm being facetious now, but let's take blockchain and crypto as an API. That thing is just ridiculous that, yes, it might be technically superior, but the impact that it's having on our already strained environment, it shouldn't even be allowed to operate. But because of other factors and incentives like greed, we're having the conversation about its existence. It shouldn't exist.
I agree. So in this particular case, I blame capitalism. No, I'm not joking. It's essentially these things get a lifeline, or they get actually a lot of life because there are ways of siphoning money out of other people's pockets.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are promises. Hey, you need blockchain for this. That any techie person could say. Every database gives you that. You don't need a blockchain. You could just go and use MySQL, and you will get most of those benefits. Yeah, you could make it transparent if you want. You don't need a blockchain for that either. Same with crypto. Yeah, so well, almost all the benefits that they say they are available by other means. It's just like, hey, this is the new shiny thing. And by making it look new and shiny thing, you get people to invest in it and pay for it. And if we wouldn't have such a focus on the constant flow of money, yeah, so it has to go from somewhere to somewhere else. Money can't rest; it has to be working, etc. A lot of these dysfunctions would not exist. So, I mean, I think most environmentalists, when they're seriously looking at what are the causes and what needs to change, they arrive at capitalism is this engine that makes it so hard making things sustainable. So crypto, blockchain, the way they're advocated, I'm not saying they're entirely useless, but the way they're advocated, this is just means of people getting rich. And we see this now at the crypto implosion. So the people who were early in made their money and got out. Mm-hmm. The people who were making the losses were the people who were promised, hey, everybody's going to win here.
And the visual in my head is literally they were telling everybody to point to one bullseye, but the real bullseye was somewhere else.
Yeah.
And the technology by itself, is there anything wrong with it? No, but it was so misapplied, so misaligned that the impact is of what is the value? The value to our environment is adding to the pressure that we already have. The value to people. I saw an article the other day where I can't remember which system it was. They showed the JavaScript, and I just had to shake my head. They basically had logic in there that if you wanted to do a transfer, your balance got set to 1. So your money was still in the system, but because the ledger got set to 1, this is like you go to your bank account, online bank account, and it says you have €1 or 1 krona in my case, or $1 in your account, when actually you don't. But there's no way then for you to mitigate and correct that and fix the balance in order for you to acquire your money. How can somebody make a system like that? My head is exploding. How is that even legitimate?
I've been thinking a lot about transactional versus non-transactional relationships. And this the multidimensionality of value is a scary thing, because we're trying to turn value experiences into something that's measured in the same standards, and that is collapsing a lot of the surplus value that was inside of the system, and it's removing a lot of the experience that people have. So it feels to me that crypto is kind of, or I don't know if all applications, there's probably some ways, well, cryptocurrency probably, but it feels that it's trying to do this tightly coupling thing, that we're talking about that SOAP is doing across the organization. But now what they're trying to do is to tightly couple all of humanity, where we're now trying to standardize the experience of value for everybody in society into the single one-dimensional money dimension. And that's just scary, because it just doesn't allow for that freedom, that dance, that normally gives the possibility to discover new things and to develop new things.
Right.
And it freezes experiences, I think.
Well, I agree with you about transactionality in terms of it's one point to another and it's in one direction.
Mm-hmm.
But the example that I explained to you at least would have been, right,
Mm-hmm.
that person's balance that was in their account would flow in the direction that they wanted it to, not get reset effectively to zero because of a built-in error in that system. I mean, if that happened in the banking system, there would be a riot.
Yeah.
People were told that it had the robustness of the existing physical finance system, but it was just electronic.
Yeah.
And it turns out it's mostly electronic and not much else.
Without the proper constraints to make sure that nothing goes wrong, or somebody's going to have to pay for it. I guess that's what regulation does. But yeah,
that's true. So I think, but back to a question that you asked me about trying to describe complexity.
Mm-hmm.
My working theory is that you have to experience it. There is no one description of complexity. So I need to give people enough experiences so they can build their personal mental model of what complexity means to them.
Mm-hmm.
Me trying to define it for them is like me saying, I prefer, I don't know, lattes, and everybody has to drink lattes. Back to the prescriptive. So, yeah, creating experiences for them to build their reference. So we say the same word, but it means completely different things to the people, because what you're doing is you're invoking your own internal mental model and memories for that. But it's a facet of complexity because it's multi-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
So and I'm okay with that. It took me a long time to get to that point, and I was very frustrated that there wasn't the one thing. But on the one hand, you can either allow for that variability, or you can try and prescribe everything. I'm not in the school of trying to prescribe everything.
Going even a little bit further. So first of all, you can't talk to people about complexity that haven't experienced it. Mostly you can actually also not talk to them if that experience in the past, as in they have to experience it at the moment. And then you have a chance to explain maybe some of the things they're experiencing through some ideas informed by complexity. The only people you can actually talk about complexity in theory are people who are aware that they experienced it more than once, so have more than one context in which Dave Snowden taps into that when he talks about the children's party, because a lot of people are parents, and so almost every parent experienced complexity when bringing up children. So as soon as you have two contexts in which people actually experience complexity, and you start to talk about some of these models that we're using to explain complexity, they can, so I can see how that works in this context, and then suddenly it's, now I see why this has value. But I was really pleased you said that, because sometimes, when we realize, hey, okay, they haven't experienced it, so that's why we can't explain it, we still ask ourselves, or am I just crap at explaining it?
No. People have to, but you said a really good point, Mark. Context and multiple contexts. So I find people who are bilingual understand. People who have had multiple careers, multiple of an aspect. back to my example about the three-dimensional cube. So if you flatten it, it's a T, or it can be a number of configurations. And then you okay, so this is this side of this cube, and then this is this side. Okay, so I need to figure out what X, Y, Z coordinates I'm at the moment inside of this 3D space. But that comes with, I think, experience. And then once somebody, like you said, has experienced something multiple times, and then you give it a name, oh, that's what that thing is. It's a little bit like, it's like falling in love. No two people fall in love exactly the same way. Yes, they can tell you that it's oxytocin and blah, 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 and a whole bunch of chemicals. That's not it. When you experience it, then you're like, okay, so that's what all that conversation, the sappy songs and all so that's what it is. But until you experience it yourself, it's very hard to describe.
Yeah. So it's this, but I think a lot of people choose to forget because it's this scary experience, because it's this superimposed, it's just like falling in love. Actually, it's a really good analog, because when you're falling in love, it can be a very scary experience. Is it or not? Does the other one love me or not?
You actually often need to be there when they experience the complexity.
Right.
So,
Yes.
because, 3 months later, they actually rationalize everything away.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Would allow you to talk about the complexity aspect of it.
Yes.
It becomes a complicated thing.
I wasn't in love anyway, because they rejected they rejected me. So
it was just infatuation.
Yeah.
Yep. But I think it's important to have language and vocabulary to talk about it, because if you don't have a name for something, then it's very difficult to have the conversation and do the exploration and everything else. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to think of a time when the word complexity actually came out of my mouth. And I think I'm trying to recall maybe in the last 6 months, and also because of my environment is applied. I'm not a lecturer. I'm not somebody teaching this. I'm usually solving problems or exploring certain spaces or trying to understand what just happened and what's going on. And another word that is a word that I think is overused is emergence. People use emergence like something just appeared out of nothing. It has been happening. Emergence means that we finally become aware and can acknowledge and see that thing and maybe even give it a name. But it has always been there. So being a bit more humble and a bit more open and curious and interested in terms of what else is going around me that I don't notice, that I don't see, that I'm not observing, but it's happening.
Right, it's this quantum state where you're experiencing multiple things at the same time.
I'm laughing, Christoph, because seriously, I could spend weeks talking to you and Mark. I have these conversations. I can count on my hand how many people I can have this conversation with. But if I said, "Oh, it's a quantum state," people would be like, "Okay, I think I'm leaving and going home now." Because I have no idea what you're talking about. Yes.
Yes, super. I'm worrying now because I use this a lot.
I use a lot of those things in jest because yes, it is funny. And a talk that I gave 2 weeks ago to some of my AI colleagues. I mean, these are dyed in the wool data scientists talking about algorithms and statistics and everything. And I decided to be provocative, so I led with George E.P. Box's quote: "All models are wrong, but some of them are useful." Now, if you start from the premise that all models are wrong, what are you talking about? You're talking about model is wrong, but okay, let's see how we can apply it and use it. Helps to, I think, balance the whole, this is the truth, this is the prescription, this is the, no. So even with the quantum state, it's a model for something that we've observed and we're trying to understand, but it's not accurate because we're going to understand the bullseye is going to move. We're going to understand more, and we'll call it something else. When I was in school, we had nucleus, atom, electron. That was it. Now we have quarks and quanta and all the rest of it.
I want to go back to your AI colleagues. Are they familiar with this expression that all models are wrong, but some are useful? Is that something that people in the AI space?
Well, I use that particular quote because the person who stated it wrote it in 4 papers between 1976 and 1982. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about some really novel things at the time, which were amazing. And he was just trying to tell everybody, look, this might be novel and it's great, but it's just a model, right? Yeah. Essentially, this is a representation. It's helping us to get a better understanding. And he was a statistician, I can never say that word, and a professor. So he was respected. And I think it's really important to start from a place of humility. I don't know everything. I know a bunch of stuff, useless information, good information, and the like. I've worked and been around for a while. But there's also a bunch of things that I don't know. So I should still be open to learning about those and pursuing those and finding out about those. Again, keeping the space. Once you're prescriptive and you're like, I know everything, then.
So, but do you think that's because this, I wonder if you almost don't have to be a utopist to be doing AI, because you have this, because to be able to believe in the model that you are creating, or to be able to work in AI, I think you almost have to believe in the model that you're creating or the usefulness of it. Is this something that people are aware in that space? Do you? Well, I'm not talking about your colleagues specifically, but
yeah. So we're talking about machine learning because okay, let's be specific. AI is made up of a bunch of technologies at least. Yes. Okay, so we're talking about cognition and intellect, but synthetic. Mm-hmm. So some is focused around language, so natural language processing, speech to text, text to speech, all of that, right? Mm-hmm. So you get those massive, large language models, everything from GPT-3 to the ones that are popular right now, which is DALL-E and what is it? Yes. Something fusion, statistical fusion, or whatever it's called. Then you have all the mathematics around what is machine learning, but basically it's probabilistic evaluation. That's what that is. Then you have visual, I know it's called visual recognition, which is a pet peeve of mine, but it's visual image processing, which is all about matrices, being able to take an image, break it down, and then that's why you can go from one to the other. So something like DALL-E and the like combine all 3 of those with something that's called transformers in order to be able to take a text, join it to an image, and then take that image and then transform it and take it through a matrix and do that. So, and then you have things like things that people are familiar with, like the agents and chatbots, trying to provide information and knowledge in the form of customer service. And there's a bunch of other aspects as well. So I think from my personal observation, from my colleagues who are working in AI, you have people who are really trying to, as scientists, understand and replicate human brain intelligence.
Yes.
And evolving that understanding and doing that by creating those models. Those models are not reference models, they're exploratory models.
Yeah.
Some of those exploratory models then are good enough, just like Mark said, for a particular application or particular use to be leveraged.
Yeah.
The problem is that what most people haven't factored in with the whole socio-technical interface back to people that we're talking about is the way that those models are applied. There is no capability for the person who is experiencing that to intervene. I can't walk into an airport and say, I don't want you to use my face for any facial recognition anywhere. I saw a nightmare advert the other day where if you look at a at a board, then it would put up all your details on a board that is, I don't know how many meters in the air and how wide. I don't want to announce that I'm at the airport and I'm going to this particular flight. And they thought that was a good idea. Somebody thought that was a good idea. So it's not necessarily just the technology, but what was not built into that was the possibility for me to opt out. Coming into that and say, if you see me, just miss me. Don't even acknowledge my existence. Just behave like I'm not there.
But isn't that a result of a reductionist way of looking at artificial intelligence? Is that there's this expectation that there's a single truth that or there's a single bullseye that's not moving, and because people believe that there's just one bullseye and we're just going to hit the bullseye, but actually that it's multiple bullseyes at the same time. And different people are experiencing it differently.
Yes, but what you have to remember is that a lot of the things that we talk about as AI and models, that's the engine. Someone is driving the car, and the person who's driving the car is the one that's saying this is going to be the prescribed use, which doesn't reflect in reality.
Better way of looking at it is not that there are multiple bullseye, but a lot of AI or ML efforts, people are self-selecting what the bullseye should be without actually looking at the environment and where's this going to sit. And so they self-determine the bullseye without any regard of the environment. And that's why it's then ending up being destructive. Whereas if they actually from the beginning actually say, okay, so what's the environment in which this should live and we want it to live, and who are the people who will interact with it? Well, if they would start there, then they would actually have a decent bullseye. The issue is they're not. So it's technologists and investors just going, into their ivory tower literally and say, let's cook this thing up.
I don't know if you have seen it, but there's a Princeton professor, Anand, I forget his surname, and he has a PhD student. And they had noticed in the last couple of years that there were a lot of papers that were being released that were in the political space. And one in particular said that it was 90% more accurate than any other statistical current method at predicting, not forecasting, predicting civil war, based on looking at GDP, unemployment, and so they went and ran the numbers, and it was not even just worse than the current tools. It was completely fictitious. So basically, what had happened in that case, but to your point, Christoph, is because those researchers are trying to live within a system where they only get credit if they've published certain papers in certain periodicals
Mhm.
in order to advance. It's a race to the bottom. So he called it the replication crisis, but to me, it's not a replication crisis. It's a I think Mark said it really well. They chose a problem that they should never have applied that technology to in the first place. Because the thing that caught my eye, I don't even know what the model is, but the thing that caught my eye is that it started off with saying that civil war is one of the most traumatic experiences that any human being would ever experience. And then you flippantly go and take some erroneous model and put on top of it and say, oh, we can predict this.
Mm-hmm.
Without
Why?
actually field testing it.
Yes. So if they talk to socialists, talk to everybody else, it turned out that they, even as data scientists, the model was completely inaccurate. And then he held a workshop, and they thought that maybe 300 people would show up. 1,500 data scientists showed up. That's how concerned they are about this race to the bottom, because again, it's another form of induced greed. Capitalism by itself is not bad, but when you induce greed and excess, then things get twisted. That was something that I mentioned, and then one of my colleagues said, oh, but they didn't do a gut check. It's like, and why do you think that is? What was their motivation for not stopping to think that, okay, this model that we created, it's a term in AI, it's called overfitting. So I'm sure you've heard of the example where way back, they were trying to determine military application, whether a tank was present or not. What happened was the days they took the picture for the tank was a sunny day. The days they took the picture for the other vehicles was a cloudy day. The inference from the model was basically whether it was cloudy or not, because that's the thing that determined mostly based on supervision whether there was a tank in the picture or not. So obviously they put it out in the field and they noticed that, okay, this thing is crazy because it's calling things that shouldn't be. And it changed depending on the time of the day. The same thing was a tank that wasn't. And then somebody kind of finally figured it out. One thing I wanted to ask both of you, how did you come to this topic, this conversation, this realization, both for the both of you?
It's a different journey. So I studied biology, and I came across complexity through, well, some of the things that interested me in the biology realm, although so they were talking more about chaos theory and strange attractors at the time, but then also philosophy of science. And then I got frustrated because I had no way of working in any. So I'm come from Switzerland, and basically all the jobs are pharmaceutical. So there was nothing for me to work in. So I actually just kept it as an interest until I bumped into Alicia at the Lean UX conference. I said, I'm not alone interested in this. Oh, there's a whole field. And I sort of read some of the things that came out, and I got awareness of that, but I didn't know how it progressed over the years from what I studied to when I bumped into Alicia. But it has sort of, for me, always been around. Well, for Christoph, it was more, you speak for yourself.
It was also been around. Like at university, I had a course, system dynamics, which was something it was one of those courses that everybody was failing on. And I was sitting in the course, and it was like, this is really, really interesting, and it's amazing. I want to understand this, because if I can understand this, I think I can understand the world, or that feeling. But it was so bonkers, because it was just like a diagram, and you were like strange attractors, and you had like how many times you circle the dot determines if it's going to be a stable system or not. And it was like, what? But then that went away. So I was I think I didn't fail that course. I don't remember. But then like all these books about chaos theory and so on just piqued my interest a lot. Emergence, those kind of topics. And then I think I got a new boost when I learned about Cynefin. There was one boost. Then I got another boost, and this is because I read Neither Ghost Nor Machine, which afterwards I learned was based on Alicia Guerrero's work. That book, it's taught me, like when I read that, it was this flipping the world, kind of like from just looking at the world as it is to looking at the constraints. And that just was like I put on new glasses and I was seeing the world in a different way. Very, very interesting.
Cool.
So, but the start for this was also, so we had this conversation, Christopher and I, where we actually said, well, what we experience in the business world is usually when people are confronted with complexity, they look for a reductionistic, they're looking for a recipe. Yeah.
Every time. Yes.
And most people, when they even talk about complexity, so in the engineering world, they tell you about how to reduce it. Yes. And as biologists, our experience is actually, no, complexity is what enables novelty. That's what gives diversity, what creates all this lovely richness in the world. So so that's where deliberate complexity, I think that was Christoph's moniker. You came up with that phrasing, but that's why we said, can we explore that specifically? Yes, sometimes it's correct that you need to reduce it, because sometimes also you create unnecessary complexity through misorganization and things like that. But what nobody was talking about was like, but what are the good bits? Sort of, where should you embrace it, and where should you make it so how do you get it to flourish? How do you get to the novelty? How you get it to be enabling for things? So complexity theory gives you some theory, but we want to talk to people and see what's the experience. So also, because as you say, if people are experiencing these things, hearing somebody talk about how their experience, that allows them to connect. Oh yeah, so I didn't know this was complexity. Now that I hear you talk about your experience of it, I can connect to it.
I think it's really last point I make. As you were talking, Mark, I literally looked at my career, and I think we know it's there, but because it doesn't have a name, we can't see it directly. We kind of go looking for it. I started out as a scientist. We know everything. Then computing, discovering, exploring, and now I'm a designer, literally in the novel area where, okay, let's go and see what's happening. So I would love to understand, what would a job in the chaos space look like?
But I think that we need to go beyond. So we come from this world where we're trying to turn everything into machines, where we're trying to take peoples and turn them into machines. And if you want to go beyond the machine world, we need to understand, we need to become deliberate about complexity. We can't try to treat people like a part of a machine, trying to determine what they're going to do. We have to give them space to be complex and to fall in love. We didn't ask you, what was your story about how did you end up with complexity?
I think I saw things, they didn't have a name. And I think to Mark's point, I was a little frustrated because I felt like I would say something. People are like, what the hell are you talking about? It's like, it's right there. Can you not see? And so, okay, I'll go out and check it out myself and figure out. And then along the way, met people who I think were also on that journey. So I didn't have a name for it. I had seen the evidence of it. Now I realize why I couldn't describe it very well, because if other people are not experiencing it and aware of it and seeing it, then I might as well be talking, I don't know, Greek. And have always been looking for answers to why. So if you ask my friends and my colleagues, and I'm an annoying why asker. Why? There's a reason, but I'm not satisfied with the prescriptive, it's because. Where's the evidence? I say so. That is not evidence. Why is it this way? So yeah, I think that's my I would say my professional journey in a nutshell, and why I wasn't attached necessarily to titles. I would do anything that allowed me to look at that deeper. Okay, let's go for it. I don't care what it's called. And I have a lot of conversations now, people, but you could have been a scientist. It's like, yes, but it didn't have the answers I was looking for. So I tried something else. And you could have been a CTO. Yes, but it didn't have the answers. And I don't, for now, where I'm at, I'm able to look at those things and have these conversations and get those answers. Those experiences have informed how I look at things and given me that multidimensionality, which is why one of the way you can think about complexity is it's like a crystal lattice, a 3D. So it's intertwined as opposed to just aligned like magnetic filing. So I think I've been exploring and had the opportunity to explore. It hasn't always been easy, but yeah, so exploring.
But it was also a multiplicity in your career, like this switch over from scientist to design. It feels that it's hard to explore complexity if you're sticking in just one area. Like you need to be combining different things together.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
You need to experience it differently before you can see, okay, so here's this context and here's that context. And yes, there is a commonality in the experience.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah. And then there's also a collective aspect to it. It's not something you can do on your own, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, in a nutshell, Christoph, that's been my journey, if you like, into complexity. But I like the phrasing that you and Mark have. It is deliberate. There's nothing accidental or random about it, but it's hard to understand how it all intertwines and comes together. So yeah.
And we need to embrace it and become deliberate about it to make the next step in our evolution as a species. It was lovely talking. There's some interesting. I like the VHS versus Betamax because a lot of different layers. I'm going to start using that. I'll attribute it to you. And yeah, very, very interesting conversation, Dawn. Thank you very much for joining us.
I had a really good time talking to you and Christoph and Mark. I've enjoyed this conversation. It's not one that I have that often before people start to look at me like,
well, maybe we need to do something about that.
And I'd love to so, like you said, Mark, continue. How can this get expanded? How can we engage people as they're experiencing this and let them know that, okay, that is what complexity is, and that over there is complexity, and these are the tools that you can use to think about it. Because my personal journey was trial and error, having wonderful conversations with people like you, serendipitously. And I'm sure there must be a way for us to be able to do that without being prescriptive, maybe in a more deliberate way. I have been listening and going through your back channel, and thank you for making this space. I know it can't have been easy. It's not necessarily popular, but it's very much appreciated.
Thank you for being part of it, for helping to make this space and for growing it together. I think it's this superpower. It just feels like there's some people that understand complexity, but they don't want to share their superpower. They just want to keep it for themselves.
Well, personal philosophy that I have is one of abundance. There is so much
Yes.
that you could give the thing away and more will return to you. It's not to be contained, but I understand why some people would do that, because again, it's a place of prescription. It's the only thing I can do. Why? There's infinite possibilities. Go after something else, and yeah. So but each to their own, I think.
Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, have a good rest of your evening. I guess you
Yes,
guys
you
are.
too.
Are you still in Switzerland, Mark?
No, I'm in the UK for 25 years. I just grew up
okay.
in Switzerland.
And remind me, where are you, Christoph?
I'm in Belgium, so I'm just one hour ahead.
Yeah. So
States.
so I'm in Denmark. So I think I'm the same.
Yeah, pick that up.
Same
The
time.
two of you are the
zone.
same time zone.
Yeah. All righty. Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Christoph.
Thank you,
Let me
Dawn.
know if there's anything else that
We will.
you need me to do,
We'll get back to you. There will be more.
very happy to continue the conversation, and have a good rest of the week.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
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 That's it for this episode. This episode of the Resilience Podcast was brought to you by Pronovix and Contextualize. You can learn more about our companies at pronovix.com and maturitymapping.com. Thank you for listening, and until next week, be sure to mind the context.